what are the 6 different co-teaching models? When you think about Friend and Cook's work in 2006, they sort of identify 6 different ways that teachers can work with one another. And I'm sure for those of you who are in collaborative classroom settings, these will probably feel familiar to you. But for some of you, this still might be completely brand new. So when we first think about one popular co-teaching model, it's what we call one teach, one observe. Now, in this popular model, what basically is happening is that there's one teacher in front of the classroom and they're doing all of the lion's share of the teaching. And then the other teacher is observing that teaching in action. Now, what's the pro about having this style of collaboration happening between 2 teachers is that it gets all of the kids together. And if I have any IEPs coming up, or I'm working to determine some next steps for some of our behavior plans, I might use this model as an opportunity to observe students in action, to assess individual students and watching them interact in the lesson itself. But the con to this kind of a session could be that it positions one teacher as being the lead teacher. And if, we're going back to some of the words you brought out, collaboration, partnership, sometimes the one teach, one observe model then sort of puts people on the out a little bit. But it's not one that we want to discount. We want to use it, especially if we're trying to collect data on kids. Another type of co-teaching model is one that we call one teach, one assist. Sometimes you can call this teacher and hawk. This is also a very, very popular co-teaching model that I see in classrooms all the time. It's basically when one teacher's in charge of the class and doing the main teaching, but the other teacher in the classroom is basically roaming. There's a little room to support. So they might work with a small group within and support a small group, or they might just be helping out around the meeting area or the classroom as needed. What's nice in this model is that it can provide a little individualized help for all of the students. And it is also very easy to observe behaviors and what kids are doing as learners. Again, though, with the con that sometimes sets up like one person is lead, one person's not. And it also kind of sets the tone sometimes for kids that like immediate help will be there anytime you need. And so this idea or this concept of productive struggle and what do I do to move through that to get to the other side can sometimes be taken away from kids. But a good strategy, good model for when students are needing just a little bit more additional support in their learning. Another method of collaboration is just parallel co-teaching. When we think about parallel co-teaching, it's that the class is now divided into 2 groups. But the thing about this is that it's parallel, so that the content that is happening in both of those groups is the same. The benefit of this structure is that sometimes kids just need instruction in smaller group sizes. Sometimes they'll get lost in a larger area. So dividing the class in half, having just a smaller group is there. That can be powerful for some of our kids. It also positions both of the adults in the classroom as having equal ownership in the teaching work that's going on there. The challenge here is that both teachers will need to know the content. And then also because you've got 2 groups happening at the same time, noise levels in the classroom can raise. And if you've got kids who are sensitive to that stuff, that can also be tricky. But typically when you're thinking it would be beneficial to just break it down, give a little bit more privatized attention to smaller groups of kids, it's a nice model to think about. Where are we? 4? Is this the 4th one I'm sharing right now? Our 4th model that we can think about is what we call alternative teaching, right? Where when we have a majority of the students are working with one teacher, but then there's a small group of students who are working with another. You can use this to differentiate your instruction. That small group, of course, could occur like right inside the classroom. It can occur right outside the classroom or in a classroom space right nearby. Um, but the challenge with that, especially if it's one that's used often, is that sometimes kids will feel like there's a smart group and a not so smart group. So it becomes more of an issue with the children and their perceptions of one another. Again, if that's the go-to methodology all the time. We really just want to think about using alternative teaching when a majority needs one thing, a smaller group, something slightly different. And I want to be flexible and, again, not doing these things every day. Another strategy is what we call team teaching, right? And when we think about team teaching, that is where teachers are working together. They're both responsible for the content, they're both responsible for the delivery, they're deciding who's going to do what part of the lesson. Teachers are in the front of the classroom together. It's helping kids to see these teachers as equals. Both of the teachers are managing the behaviors. Sometimes what's tricky is if you don't have a good relationship or the relationship hasn't been built yet between the adults, it can sometimes feel like you're maybe stepping on toes, or sometimes students, it's kind of like, let's play mom and dad against one another. Sometimes it can be, let's play our teachers against one another as we are navigating the relationships here. But that being said, team teaching is really beneficial because it really supports this concept that we, the whole, are a community. So when we think a little bit, oh, forgot one more, last one. Station teaching. When we think about station teaching, we can think about them as being learning centers, where basically teachers can individually lead some of those centers as they go. What's nice about station teaching is there tends to be increased engagement. Most of the time, when you've got a lot of things that need to be addressed, station teaching is a nice move to make. However, station teaching does require lots of planning. Sometimes timing and how long kids are staying in stations can come up as issues. But when kids can need different things, different types of instruction, maybe a different method, different way of content, that station teaching can be a nice model to go to. So lots of times people think about, well, how do we make this team teaching work in our classroom environment, especially if we're thinking about reading or writing workshop? And when I think about those methods or those structures, I don't necessarily think about it as like, we're going to do this for the entire workshop, but I do think about dividing up workshops into the different parts of of time. So what might be the structure that we're going to use inside of our mini lesson versus what might be the structure that we're going to use inside of our independent time versus what might be the structure that we're going to use during our end of workshop share. So during a mini lesson, you can easily see one teach, one assist, or one teach, one observe, or team teaching or parallel teaching happening, right? You can see those structures living out and being in place there. During independent time, when kids are off to do some independent reading, to do some independent writing, that's a perfect opportunity to bring in some station teaching. It allows both of the teachers in the classroom to be pulling and working with small groups of kids, why some might still be working independently on different things. Alternative teaching could be something that's happening here. And sometimes even one teach, one observe, right? Like there's call for one teach, one observe in a whole class setting, but there's also call for one teach, one observe during independent time. Again, if we're trying to track data, sometimes just kid watching is a good form of data. And so it might be I, the teacher, am going to be teaching, but then I've got my collaborative teacher doing some data gathering on students around the space. Or during end of workshop share, you can think again about one teach, one assist, one teach, one observe, team teaching, and parallel teaching. The challenges, I think, sometimes with co-teaching come up when you start thinking about time. We never have time. How do we make this work? And so I want to provide you with a few little tips around planning that you can consider. I do think that although time is always challenging, we do need to be working to find a common time and put it on the calendar. That piece of like, write it down, write it down so we can stick to it is an important step for us. You know, if we don't even have it on the calendar, we're never going to have the time to do it. I think about my best friend and I, we both turned 50 this year. We want to go to Nashville to celebrate our 50th birthday. My birthday was in August. Her birthday was in December. We still have yet to get to Nashville. Now, why is that? Because we haven't put it on the calendar. And so we keep putting it off and we keep putting it off. And so that sort of thing sometimes happens. And we want to ensure that that's not what's happening in our day-to-day teaching, right? Another thing that you want to be thinking about when it comes to the planning, we want to think about our academic goals for the week, right? Because as we're co-teaching, as we're doing this work together, we do want to think like, what's the big work this week? What is it that we really want to hold on to and really want to ensure that we're supporting our kids with? And when we're doing that work, thinking about our academic goals, we want to now think about that student need, right? What here are we going to need to modify the content around? What here are we going to need to modify process around? What here are we going to not need to modify some of the product around? Once we have those things in place, the academic goals, the student needs, that's when I think the best place for choosing the structure will happen. We want to ask, okay, well, what's the best structure that's going to get us to where we want to be? Once you've decided structure, then obviously thinking about tools, materials is going to be that very next step. Uh, and then finally thinking about any technology that we could be used. And I feel like, gosh, technology is the buzzword, but it doesn't always mean computer, right? It could be lots of different tech that we might have available or have access to in our classrooms. And we want to be thinking about how that's going to support us in the work that we're doing with our kids.